Why does this scenario of scheduling a meeting get more complicated when we have 50 people than when we have 2 people? The simple answer is there's more communication that has to happen. When we have 2 people, it means there's basically one communication channel between those 2 people. If we move from 2 to 3 people, we go from one communication channel to 3. So we're not just, even though we're only adding one person, we're adding 2 communication channels. When we go from 3 to 4, it means going from 3 communication channels to 6. So you can see that this isn't a linear growth pattern. And that's really where the complication comes in. The more people that you add, the more communication channels that you add, and it very quickly explodes into something unmanageable. Now, there's ways that we can simplify this. We don't necessarily need every person to talk to every other person. I mean, that's certainly one way to do it, but there are other ways as well. I mean, how would we do this in the real world? Well, in the real world, we probably wouldn't, if we're trying to schedule a meeting with, 50 people, have all 50 of those people talk to everybody else. That would be very inefficient. So what would we do? Well, first off, we'd probably set one person to be in charge of this. So we would say, okay, one person is now going to be responsible for scheduling the meeting. Now, that person is going to be responsible for doing things like going to each of the people and checking with them on times. So we take our communication channels and we reduce them so that it's just between whoever that organizer is and all of the other people. So that makes things a little more efficient. It reduces the number of communication channels, but it also introduces a problem. The problem that we introduce at that point is that one person now becomes a single point of failure and a central bottleneck, right? So if that person becomes unavailable for some reason, then all of a sudden we can't schedule the meeting anymore. The person whose job it was to do that is gone. So if our goal is to be available and to make sure that this meeting gets scheduled at all costs, then having one person responsible for it isn't going to work. We're going to have at least some fallbacks in case that one person becomes unavailable for some reason. So although we can reduce the amount of communication by introducing a single expert, a single organizer, we do that at a cost. There is an expense associated with that. There's other things we could do. We could say, well, let's just use some sort of electronic calendar system like Outlook or Google Calendar or whatever your preferred calendar approach is. That would be fine. But really all we're doing there is we're still creating a single expert, a single organizer, but in this case it's a piece of technology. So your Google Calendar or your Outlook calendar is now the single expert on everybody's calendars. And so again, if that goes down for some reason, if it becomes unavailable for some reason, then we can't schedule this meeting again. So it still represents a sort of a single point of failure. Granted, it's the way those are implemented, they probably have lots of fallbacks and a lot of flexibility there. But it also introduces a different problem. And the other problem that it introduces is that calendar is always dealing with stale data. When we look at that electronic calendar, what we are seeing is what a person's schedule was the last time they updated the calendar. That may be different from what their schedule is now. So at the time that I am looking at that calendar and trying to schedule a meeting with that person, they may at the same time be talking to somebody else and scheduling a meeting for a different time. They may be organizing a doctor's appointment or booking vacation or whatever the case may be. So we are looking at a stale copy of the data, and as a result, we can't really be confident when we book that meeting that it's going to work out. So this represents a real problem. The real problem is that when we try to do something which seems simple, like scheduling a meeting, it turns out there's a lot of complexity involved there that, when we deal with this in our day-to-day life, we just sort of pretend that complexity doesn't exist or we ignore it. And then when a problem comes as a result of that complexity, that's when we deal with it. So this is the problem. The problem is that when you have a bunch of people and you try to schedule a meeting, it's actually a very complex process. And it can potentially take a lot of time. And that's what we're going to talk about when we talk about coherency delay.